This is Diplomatica with Owei Lakemfa on Citizen 93.7 FM Abuja. We have as guest today one of those rare Africans, a Pan-Africanist to the core, Tauko. You're welcome, sir.
Thank you, comrade.
With Tauko, we'll be discussing Africa generally, reparations, the slave trade, a number of challenges Africa has had. Like I said, Tauko is a Pan-Africanist, a cultural activist, a veteran broadcast journalist, a trade unionist, a musical artist. He was Director General of the National Theatre, and he was also the Director General of the National Troupe of Nigeria. Tauko speaks 8 languages. Of course, he speaks English language. He speaks French. I think he even has a first degree in French, I'm sure. Yeah. So he even has a first degree in French. He speaks Spanish. He speaks Hausa. He speaks Yoruba. He speaks Igbo. He speaks Swahili. And of course, he's a thief man, so he speaks thief. Pleased to meet you, sir.
Thank you.
And welcome.
Thank you.
Yes. We're going to discuss about Africa, our past, and what can be done for the future. Africa, as we know, was devastated by the white civilization, colonized, enslaved. Our territories were seized, our natural resources were seized, our human resources were vandalized, we had massacres, our artifacts were stolen, and of course, when you say artifacts, we also have human artifacts, more or less to say. Comrade, you just came back from a conference in Ghana, reparation conference in Accra, Ghana. That conference held between August 1 to 4, 2022, and it was on advancing justice, reparations, and racial healing summit. That's what we had in Ghana. What was this about?
Well, first, to pay my respect to MacArthur Foundation, who were the major sponsors of these major global African regroupement, reassembled to debate on racial justice, racial healing, restitution, repatriation of cultural assets and artifacts and human parts back to Africa as a consequence of the European transatlantic slave trade. Now, Ghana gave different institutions. The Marcus Garvey Institute was also represented by, happily, the surviving son, eldest son of the greatest of African Pan-Africanists and founder of Pan-Africanism in the world, Marcus Mosiah Aurelius Garvey. His son, Dr. Julius Garvey, was one of the paper presenters in that conference. But what was the conference about? The European transatlantic slave trade is known all over the world in history as one of the most horrendous, colossal holocausts perpetrated by man against man. It makes the Jewish Holocaust of the Nazi against the Jews in Germany and Europe pale into insignificance, because this was plunder of African resources, human materials, destruction of our civilizations for 400 years plus, and continuous because after the slave trade, transatlantic slave trade, capturing black people, forcing them into wars of attrition and expansion, it was to create the basis to support the Industrial Revolution by white I call them brigand civilizations. Now, these civilizations moved into colonialism, another brigand civilization. And consequently, today, Africa is depleted by wars emanating from colonialism. So, what are we doing today? We came together as Africans. This was not the impetus of the state or state actors. That's the significance of this reparation conference. Because I remember as a young student in Ghana, about 75, was the first anti-apartheid and reparation conference by civil society organizations and a few African liberation movements that were in Ghana then participated. So you can imagine 47 years later, I, as an adult now, my middle age, I'm opportuned by history to go back to what I started with others as revolutionary Pan Africanism to restore the dignity of Black people on earth and to help African societies heal from what we call inferiority complex of the white man imposing their rule on us. First, material imposition, material domination, hence colonial mentality. What my late older brother and musician Fela Anikulapo Kuti will call the loss of memory of history of African people, Kolo mentality. Now, reparations for us is in three segments. You have reparations, which is to discuss the magnitude of negative effects of the stealing of Black people, physical destruction of their civilization, and material resources for 400 years to go and develop Western societies today, what you have today. So you have already African civilizations. That's correct history. Colonial history didn't want us to know that not all Africans outside Africa went by slave trade. Black kingdoms ruled from Senegal to Mali existed in America 50,000 years ago and had traffic, maritime traffic between West Africa, the Caribbean, the ancient civilizations of the Inca civilization, the Mayan civilization, the Aztec civilization in Peru, Ecuador, Mexico, all those areas, and what you call the Sarawak Indians. That's the Native American population of Indians before the arrival of European brigands and fortune tellers and military conquistador from European lands into that place. So the reparation conference was at the impetus of us Africans wanting to globalize. So we call it the Global African Conference on Reparation and Restitutive Justice, Racial Healing. That is the crux of our meeting, to redefine and have a roadmap to collectively work as Black people to restore first our self-dignity. A slave has no dignity. And a slave cannot negotiate with a master. So now, relatively, we are free, independent African states. So we feel we, the children of these states, and Africans who are post-slave society citizens, why don't we come together and argue for ourselves what to do? Whether you are in India, India, by the way, has the largest population of people of African descent on earth, because India was an indigenous home of Black civilization right from the time of Queen Makeda of Saba, the popular Queen of Sheba in the Bible, and Bilqis in the Quran.
So do we deserve, why do you think we deserve reparation?
Well, what do you deserve?
In material terms, in concrete terms.
Yes, in concrete terms, because it's our right. Europe stole our birthright using force, violence, and distorting our economies, and took away all the brightest of Africa's human capital development were shipped to go and develop the civilizations of Europe that I still call brigand civilizations. So today we have wars of attrition, wars, colonial wars and post-colonial wars, where you have resources of Africa plundered, and it goes to develop the West. So we want to have a common dialogue among ourselves. Let's agree that we ourselves made mistakes as Black people. We want to be addressed as Africans, not diaspora. We are not diaspora. We want to be addressed as Africans so that we know that we have a common purpose, we have a common destiny, like Marcus Garvey says, one people, one destiny, one fate. So do we deserve reparation? Yes, because our resources were plundered by the West to develop their capitals. Most of us schooled in the West. I schooled in England, I schooled in France, I traveled around Europe, and my first reaction was anger, really desperate anger. I hated the West for what they have done to us in Africa and made us want to relish to go to the metropolis. And in fact, the French, I read French, so the French was worst. Because when they are going to Paris, they say, je vais à la capitale. I'm going to the capital. Je voyage à la capitale with pride. So people saw their own.
That is Africans. Or
Africans.
Africa.
Africans will tell you, moi je travaille, je voyage à la capitale. I'm traveling to our capital, not to their villages.
Yeah.
Congolese or Francophone Africa will never tell you they are going to their villages, home. They say, I'm going to Paris, the capital, our capital. So when you hear our capital, these are colonial zombies cloned to love assimilation, to see France as their mother country, and hence denigrate their religion, their own cultures, their practices. So yes, we need reparations in a material, concrete sense.
But who should demand it? Who should demand reparations?
The African, globally, three categories.
Okay.
Because they impacted on us as Black people, leaving the educational and psychological side of it, materially. You see, the slave trade depleted our resources. That's why today the coastal areas of Nigeria remain bastardized and underdeveloped. It came from centuries of taking away the best productive forces in those areas. And it went with their food culture. Because if you can't produce food for your community, and if you went to the farm and you are accosted and taken as a slave, it affected the food regimen and nutritional health of the families. So it made them easy prey to Western incursion and inter so-called tribal wars that were instigated to capture slaves and sell. So yes, first we, I want to use this archaic word, the beneficiaries of the slave trade. We, the victims of that slave trade, we shouldn't be going in. It's not victimhood. We're not crying, oh, see what they've done to us. We are saying we should demand from the West our own portion of what they stole from us and help us, in quotes, help us to come to par to develop our societies. We're not begging. But what they took away from us, they should restore to us. Who should do it? Our governments and civil society should compel their governments to do this. And that's why we came together in Accra. And a civil society from America, the United States, the Black Lives Matters movement helped us a lot. Because whilst before the Americans would be in the illusion that, oh, well, we're African Americans, they were denigrated as Negroes. Today, the African Americans say, no, we are Africans in America. We're not going to leave America, but we must demand from America that justice that helps us and our people in Africa. So we want to now work with the societies all over the world. The global African is saying, let us work with the AU so that next year, in the 60th anniversary of the AU, we want all Black people on earth to have access to the AU as permanent member states with voting rights, from those post-slave trade societies like in the Caribbean, Fiji, those Samoa, New Zealand, those communities of black people that existed on their own as civilizations. India, they should have observer status. In the United States, they should have observer status in the AU. And how will that help us? It will give us a larger economic bloc. That's what the white man does not want. That's what the Europeans does not want. So we will not be fighting their colonial wars like First World War, Second Hitler's War, and now, happily, we are not fighting their Russian, Russo-Ukrainian wars for them. And you haven't seen any European country wanting to go and die for Ukrainians. But if it was before, they would draft we Africans to go show our so-called primitive bravery in the white man's country. So we are demanding this and conscientizing our own leadership elite because they are culprits. The kings are culprits. The oligarchies, the buccaneers, the war chiefs, the war commanders that raided communities for slaves. So we have to find a way of helping ourselves first, forgiving ourselves, because if we fight as a divided force, we can't make any impact.
Thank you very much. This is the Democratic Hour with Owei Lakemfa on Citizens 93.7 FM. And I'm speaking with Ta Uko, a cultural activist. We're talking about reparations. Is there any way, how do you relate this to the Holocaust in Israel? I mean, the movement.
The Holocaust, the Nazi Holocaust of Hitler against involving the extermination of Jews, that's the ethnic bigotry of the so-called pure race, the Aryan race. It's just a progression of what happened for 400 years, happened in Africa. The Germans had already perfected, the Europeans had perfected genocide on African people. Remember, pre-colonial and colonial Namibia saw the genocidal eradication of Herero warriors, the people from Sam Nuyoma's country, Toiho ya Toiho. So those who refused to work in the diamond mines had their hands amputated. If you ran away from as forced labor, you got your hands and limbs amputated or outrightly killed. Now, you have the same thing in Belgium, where King Leopold amputated those who worked in gold mines or were tired, forced slavery, the corvée labor. So Europeans had already done atrocities that it's unimaginable that these are the people who brought so-called Christianity to black people, who had a superior spirituality, I would say, than what the Christianity came to preach, because they said turn the other cheek and they looted our resources to Europe. So this reparation and Holocaust, as a human being, as humanity, the egregious effects of the Holocaust on the Jews, it's unpardonable. But hey, we Africans had Holocaust for 400 years plus. Where was the white man? Where were these European Union people? Every day they cry wolf. Till tomorrow, Palestine is under occupation by Nazi forces, by fascist groups masquerading as promoting democratic values for the West. So I think the Holocaust thing is a propaganda to justify why the West hates Nazism. But fascism is a corollary of colonialism, of slave trade, colonialism and neocolonialism. The fascists and Nazis, like Donald Trump, a fascist and a Nazist in America, Americans don't like that. And they are fighting to have their own harmless democratic space. But Africa, they perpetuate wars. Look at the Congo. Lumumba was assassinated, his body incinerated, and his golden tooth, his tooth was taken to Belgium and put in a small cage for people to come and see the golden tooth of Lumumba. How cruel. Body parts. There's a king in Ashanti land who resisted slavery and colonialism, and he was beheaded. And his head was taken to Belgium and put on display. That body part has just been returned. So yes, the Holocaust is tied to not just a fascist Nazi Holocaust. We agree the Jews need restitution. In fact, if the Jews need restitution, Africa needs it 2 million times more than the Jews. And who is going to do that restitution? The black man, demanding from the European man who stole his heritage, who stole his legacies. And we are asking in a civilized way, if you claim you are civilized democracies, return what you uno thief from us, what you forcefully took from us, our artifacts, our history, our creativity. So that's why it's larger than the Holocaust of limited Second World War. We are talking of the 400 years plus of African Holocaust by the transatlantic slave trade committed by Europeans.
Yeah, you are talking about artifacts stolen from us to be returned. What are these artifacts? And are they just about, works of art or what exactly?
First, the aesthetics of arts, the carvings, metallurgy, all those things, the bronze statues and the figurines of clay, knocked terracotta, Nupe brass, Benin, Iboku, and Ife bronze, all this showcase the best of our artistic creativity as Africans. Remember, we had civilizations that were more advanced than European civilizations before the Industrial Revolution in the 15th century, late 15th century, and now the 18th, 19th century upsurge in European expansion of creative resources and surplus for primitive accumulation to imperial domination of our economies in the third world and Africa. So, if you look at the development of African societies, the most popular now is the return of Benin bronzes. About 1,300 Benin bronzes are on their way back to Nigeria now because the dynamic leadership led by Professor Abba Tijani is the Director General of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments. That comrade has been very, very active and agile in making sure the extant protocols on return of artifacts to Africa and Nigeria particularly are honored. So we are getting back now from private museums. In Europe, you have individuals with their private museums. You have institutions, academic institutions, universities with their private museums, stashed with African artifacts, looted, not bought on any auction, but looted and stolen, and people massacred and killed. So today we are asking that those things be returned to our museums. And that is the movement that the African Union is supporting. And last week they were in Senegal for the African Union to have a common approach, a common position on the return of artifacts to warehouse them back to the indigenous communities and the nation states by international law. So it's not for them to say, are you going to keep it? Well, it's not their business. It's our business to decide where we keep it, whether in the kitchen, in the cooking pot, in our dustbin. It's our history.
Anyway, since we produce it.
Since we produce it, they stole it from us, and we're saying, hey, return it. So that is the restitution area now, the repatriation, then restitution. Remember that these things were put in museums for people to watch for 400, 300 years. Money was being paid. So we are saying, hey, as you return this to us, we have to repolish these things. We have to help rehabilitate these things. So all those decades and centuries, we have to agree on a percentage of what you refund to us materially. In cash, it could also be that we want to have tax regime of free flow of goods to your country. So the modalities are the details. But
Okay.
first, we agree that there must be restitution. Europe must restitute to Africa. And in fact, where human remains, in Namibia, for instance, Herero women are very proportionally gifted, let me put it in a nice word. And they have larger bombs, and some are gigantesque. They're very large women. And Europeans used to be obsessed with African body parts. So they'll come and capture these women and in the colonial times and put them in cages for people to see naked, for people to touch the African woman's breast, to touch her bum, and say, oh, wow, you see, these people are savages, they are primitive, they are not different. So they call them elephant women of Namibia. And some died out of overexposure because they were always naked in that winter. So the atrocities committed by European brigand civilizations is heart-rending. It wrenches your soul, and you wonder: are these really human beings? And are these people really? Do they have a religion that believes in equality of human beings? And do they believe in God? Are they not the pagans they call us that we are because we don't believe in their God? So, restitution, therefore, is returning of these body parts for proper spiritual burial so that we can close that chapter. But, like I said, for Nigeria, my Pan African Cultural Center, which is the Marcus Garvey Center for Pan African Cultural Studies, based in Jos, Plateau State. We want to start the campaign in Nigeria.
So first, what's the position of Nigerian government on this matter?
The Nigerian government is progressive on this part, but
Okay.
they are coming in late because we started early on this reparation, like I told you, during the anti-apartheid struggle in the 70s. But the military didn't want to waste their time fighting the West on reparations because already the West was against military rule. So ideologically too, they didn't align with the demands of their masses. And again, leadership, the military were also part of those who promoted slave trade and colonialism. So they didn't want to critique themselves. So they ran away from that. So it was the student movement in the main that conducted this. People like me and you growing up as young activists and militants were able to get educated by the books of Kwame Nkrumah, Lumumba, Amilcar Cabral, Nelson Mandela, the liberation movements, Aimé Césaire, Malcolm X, Marcus Garvey himself, Dubois, Franz Fanon. All these are people. Senghor, as backward as Senghor was, with his negritude, he still was able to write some things on African expressions. Cheikh Anta Diop, the great Egyptologist, people like Wole Soyinka, Chinua Achebe, African writings, Ngugi wa Thiong'o. These writings helped us to understand ourselves ideologically. So the impetus to regroup again under the AU in consonance with the period of next year's 60th anniversary. We want a regroupment, like I said, a reassembly of black people on earth. Remember, Obasanjo's regime had the privilege of hosting FESTAC to their credit, the assemblage of black civilizations and black people on earth, African people. And since then, because of the enormous resources needed to do that, it's not being replicated again. So we must help bring this reparation and restitutive justice and the healing process. Like I said in Nigeria, we revived the slave routes of UNESCO. We set them up, not just historical museums, but my proposal from our center, the Marcus Garvey Center for Pan-African Cultural Studies, is that we endow chairs on slave history. In those communities, we revive the museums and set up cultural centers, performance arenas, so that the community and society will recreate its past and go to somewhere they can produce cultural artifacts and make that place a cultural tourism hub.
Thank you very much. This is Diplomatic Hour with Owei Lakemfa on Citizen 93.7 FM Abuja. And we are speaking with cultural activist Tawuko. Let's go back to the old issue about Africa. Yes, were enslaved, and there was a return to Africa movement. What's this movement about?
Well,
Return to Africa.
yes, Return to Africa was first institutionally after the abolition of slave trade and slavery in America and Britain, when did not suit their political economy of the Industrial Revolution. They decided that instead of keeping these slaves that will be feeding every day, we need machines. Let's transmute these slaves from the farm hands into holding mechanical objects and working in factories. That's what the American Civil War was all about. In England, it successfully being a smaller space, they were able to stop the trade of slaves from Nigeria or West Africa to England, and hence the thinning out of the slave trade of human cargo replaced getting products, goods from Africa. You needed Africans to remain on the continent and farm and produce raw materials for the factories of Europe and the Americas. So these places on earth where Africans were now populated, the economic requirement was that you develop these societies, hence introduction of schools, Western type schools. Not that we didn't have schools. Catechism, it went pari passu with colonial indoctrination. The civil service, like they say, they call it, you don't do private practice. Private practice was that in Africa, it came about that you must do only the Queen's job once we employ you to work for Her Majesty's civil service. So you don't use the time of the civil service to do your private practice. Whereas in Europe, they were doing things in private, and in America, they call it moonlighting. But it produced surplus for their societies. But in Africa, we work for the colonial industry, and we produce goods. So we were like giving the production of goods. And in the military, we supply the cannon fodder of infantry. My father fought in the Second World War in Burma, parts of Japan, India, and came back with lots of medals on his chest. And we kept cleaning it until we were tired because they were brass medals and made of brass. And the money we used in brasso, when we are broke, our father said, look, throw that brasso. He was chopping our money. It's getting into leave the medal. After all, what has it benefited me except hanging on the wall? So he had lots of medals, and I didn't want to end up inheriting medals like my father, working for the white man or European, so-called European civilization. So the post-independence movement and the neo-colonial states did not see bringing back Africans from the so-called diaspora, from abroad. We are combating this word linguistically, etymologically.
Which one?
Diaspora.
Diaspora, okay.
There's nothing like African diaspora. We are Africans anywhere we are. The global African concept now is a revolutionary concept of we defining who we are. We don't want anybody to define that we are diaspora. Why are Germans not called diaspora Germans? Why are the French?
Yes, huh?
Why are the French?
Yeah.
Why are the English people? They never call themselves diaspora. So we as Africans are saying, no, it's to divide us. We call it racial imperialism. So in racial healing, we redefine who we are. We're African people, and the Return to Africa movement were championed particularly by Marcus Garvey. He was a very fantastic African revolutionary, 2 centuries ahead of his age. Marcus Garvey had his own schools for black people, had his factories where African dolls were produced for African families so that they stopped having white dolls and black children holding dollies, Barbies with funny blue eyes and yellow skin. So to avoid self-hate, to curb that, and Marcus Garvey ran newspapers because he believed in education. And he said, if we can educate the black man to understand himself as an equal to anybody on earth and the white man, it gives him courage to emancipate himself. Because a slave does not free himself, and a slave cannot negotiate with a master on equal terms. So the slave that decides to free himself or has been given so-called freedom, where does he go? Those who want to return to Africa, whether you can trace your route or not. So you see, Malcolm was a essential Pan-Africanist. Once you are Marcus Garvey, Malcolm took from Marcus Garvey. But Marcus Garvey said, let's go back to Africa. So you have C.R.L. James from Trinidad and Tobago. You had Padmore. You had Dubois, who ended up in Ghana. And incidentally, someone told me Dubois was a slave boy captured from Ogbomosho. It's a Nigerian. He was a Nigerian. Okay. But finally, his remains were interred in Ghana. So why did Ghana play this role? Because of Nkrumah. Nkrumah was a student of Marcus Garvey. Zeke was a student of Marcus Garvey. But how come Nigeria didn't follow the path of Ghana? They were all students of Marcus Garvey. He tutelaged them. He gave them that consciousness of black people. But Nigeria had its own colonial orientation. Ghana, incidentally, had a leadership that was ab initio revolutionary, Pan-Africanist, combative against colonialism. So Nkrumah was able to, from an ideological perspective, propel Ghana with Sekou Toure and others, Amilcar Cabral, and the liberation movements in those areas to want to encourage Africans to return to Africa voluntarily. Remember that the Americans took the first free slaves from America to settle them in Liberia. So they called it Liberty Area. And the Amerigo Liberians were now, the slogan is the love of freedom brought us here. And by the way, Liberia will be celebrating their 200 years anniversary next month. So, yes, who were those who propelled the Return to Africa movement? For the whites too, they turned a blind eye to it because troublesome Africans will definitely want to take opportunity and go back. But well, how can you return over 30 million people back to where in Africa? So white society, European society was stuck with black people. Now, having abolished slave trade and putting them to work in factories, Europe still had a problem, giving them political rights. Since they could tilt political electoral processes to the advantage of those parties that were for emancipation and freedom of black people. So yes, Marcus Garvey was number one in this direction. Others fought also to encourage Africans to come back. But Ghana has kept the pace up till today. Rita Marley, the wife of our legendary revolutionary comrade, late Bob Marley, incidentally came to Badagry. Somehow they didn't get what she asked for, a piece of land. Went to Ghana, and the Ghanaian government gave an estate, got the infrastructure going, and today is a thriving community of Africans returning home. I think basically from Nigeria, that's what we should be championing, to open up the Nigerian physical space, the political space for participation, progressive participation by Africans into our political economy. The cultural tourism network, getting educational grants, making Africans want to come and do business with fellow Africans. So that's the direction to go. We must have a proper orientation of who we are and who are our brothers, who are our sisters. And remember, once the African Americans or the blacks who went to Europe, who were forced and stolen to Europe, come back home, come on, morally, it's their right. We sold them out as slaves. We should thank God, as we say in Nigeria. We thank God, our children don't come back. Our children coming back. I'm always ashamed when I see an African American or any black person from the slave tradition coming back to Africa. I want to serve them because I feel guilty that my own great grandparents sold their brothers and sisters as slaves. So I hate to see any legislation or any form of discrimination against them. And as a young boy, I dedicated my time till present to fighting for their rights of return. They return to the source. This is their source. And when they come back home, they are coming with a lot of intellect. So if we aggregate this to be a state-sponsored approach and policy implementation, we're creating a big economic belt for ourselves. Europe doesn't want that. It doesn't want to see a larger African economic body. But our tradition of struggle in our own time, we the younger ones inheriting from the Zigs and Awolowo and Nkrumah, it's our duty to make our children see that bringing back our Africans who want to come home or receiving them is their natural birthright. So we are Africans.
Thank you very much. In all this, it appears African countries are not too enthusiastic about reparation, return to Africa. Why do you think this is the case?
No, partly it's ignorance. And, when you have gerontocrats, too many old men in power, they don't know where the world is going any longer. This is the digital age. The world is too fast for them. So they are used to complacency. And, when you are fighting reparations and the slave trade and colonialism, you must step on toes of our present rulers. A lot of them are lackeys of European powers, either America or the EU. These are bad governments. These are post-colonial governance, anti-people policies in education, in health, in social life, in housing policy, in security matters. So most of these failed African leaders don't want a hot topic like reparations. When you have not led your people well, how can you be asking someone from outside to come and help bring freedom? So they are guilty. They themselves need to reparate and heal the ethnic profiles of injustice against their people. Just as we are fighting racial imperialism, we must fight domestic ethnic jingoism, tribalism, those faults, religion faults, tribal faults. This you be Hausa, you be Fulani, you be Tiri, you be Bibio. Now our language person they there. We are now here, and it doesn't matter whether he exploits us. If the person steals, you say it's okay, but now my tribal man, so make it thief. So if we all excuse our own tribal man or woman from thieving, whom are we going to put in jail? Nobody. The prisons will have to be emptied. So it's the guilt complex of African leaders, the guilt complex of slave communities and slave dynasties. I met a friend yesterday, a princess from one of these Calabari kingdom, I think a Calabari lady. She says she's a princess, and her family from her dynasty, they were majorly slave traders. And she just came back from America, from the US, that she feels so ashamed. Because when she calls her family name, so okay, in the history, they were slave traders. So the new generation have to also make psychological restitution. when you know that you are enjoying privilege that your father has and left for you as legacy from looted, stolen, bastardization of people so that you have a smooth life today. You can't buy integrity and hide your past.
Let's look at Abiola, MQ Abiola. It seems to have
Well,
led some of this reparation issue.
Well, no, I will say no because I knew Abiola personally, and I tried to work with him in 1991 when his request for reparations was high on the list. But Abiola did not concretize this. It was just a slogan for political reasoning. And there was no way the military were going to support Abiola to do reparation against Western societies that one did not accept military rule, and themselves, the military regimes being autocratic, were fascist in nature, and were oppressing their people. How can they join you and do reparation? So it was not a correct fight. There was no ideological basis for it. There were no structures to support it, and it was not professionally or ideologically handled. It was because at that time, the people who were organized enough to have pushed that platform were the labor unions, the student movement. So why were they not mobilized? I was a very wealthy man. So he could have weaponized consciousness, not for negative trends, but to get these local minds to focus. So I had gone to him to meet with him to work out a program for reparation. But I discovered that ideologically we were talking two different things. So I withdrew and concentrated on my own commitment to struggle and reparations in the genuine sense of what we are doing today.
Okay. So we seem to be spending a lot of energy on reparation on the past. What will you say to those who say, look, let us concentrate on today and tomorrow? That's the future, rather than spend a lot of energy on reparation.
Well, I would say first, without history, there's no culture. Without culture, you are lost. So it is wrong. It's ahistorical. Reparation is simply saying we are stagnated where we are because external forces and negative forces internally. Two contradictions. Our principal contradiction is imperialism, colonialism, neocolonialism, and the extant slave traders. This imperial domination of Africans by European powers. Number two, the internal dynamic of collaborators of colonialists and imperialists who are Africans, kings, political dynasties, businessmen and women, military chiefs of whatever ilk it is, what we call today the bourgeoisie. These bourgeois classes are not interested in mobilizing the working class or the peasantry or progressive students front or civil servants to demand change in this global sense. So they will never ask for reparation. So it's not for them because they are already oppressing us. It's we, the working people, that will ask our local bourgeoisie to reparate, give us good education, give us good hospitals, Medicare, a good standard of living, a living wage like the NLC and working peoples will do, and access to education, lodging, housing. All these are the things that are preoccupying us. But the trajectory of the slave trade runs through. It's like the super glue that has held all these forms of oppression together. So it is ideologically correct that we link each stage of our struggle against oppression to reparation because we tie the West to their own, we ask them to hang themselves by their own petard, as we say in French. You hoist a flag of, righteousness. Live by your righteousness. In the Bible, Jesus said, physician, heal thyself. So you, African leader, heal thyself so that collectively we can ask for the European and say, we are no longer turning the other cheek. Heal thyself, white man. Heal thyself, European man. And then we can be asking for a just society. And remember, one of our comrades, Femi Falana, and a group of bright African lawyers, revolutionary lawyers, took the British government to court on behalf of the Mau Mau survivors of the Mau Mau genocide in Kenya, in the fight for Kenya independence. Dedan Kimathi, Jomo Kenyatta, and the rest. So today you have they have won that case in court, and there are more class action suits, which perhaps Nigeria should start very soon.
Thank you very much. Let me just ask a last question, as a parting question. Where what's next?
Well, we are setting up the platform now in Nigeria for reparation. We are now bringing it up to be a current team, and the Pan-African, the Marcus Garvey Center for Pan-African Cultural Studies is in the fight with this, and we are supporting the Nigerian government and the AU in the area of repatriation of our cultural artifacts and assets and body parts wherever they are in Africa, and at the same time hoping that people like you will come on board, the students' movement. We go back to education. We must return history in the correct sense.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, comrade.
This is Diplomatic Hour with Owei Lakemfa, Citizens 93.7 FM Abuja, and we'll be speaking with Tauko, Cultural Ambassador. Thank you very much for coming, sir.
Thank you, my comrade.
Thank you very much. Thank you.